Christian parenting.
Continuing our series, Family on Mission, this is one of the most thought-provoking conversations I've had in quite some time. Jeremy Pryor from Family Teams joins me today, and we talk about looking at your family as a multi-generational team that God has put on this earth to be a blessing.
In every area of life, the paradox or the tension that we have to balance between believing in the imminent return of Jesus and actually preparing for the 1,000 years or 2,000 years or however long we may be here. And I think that when it comes to family, there are really good ways to live into that tension, as it is with everything else, with work, with money, with relationships, to not treat these things cheaply because the imminent return has a potential. I think that this falls into that exactly the same category.
Hey, my name is Jay Holland, and this is Let's Parent on Purpose. It's a podcast to help you thrive and not just survive your parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, your family, or your personal walk with Jesus. And if you find it helpful, I encourage you to subscribe, share it with your friends, and you're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find all kinds of past articles, issues, and resources to help your family. I'm so glad you keep coming back week after week because I know that I am encouraged by these conversations, and I hope that you are as well. It is good to hear how different people have been equipped by God to be on mission, and it's almost like the Holy Spirit's in charge. He puts things on some families to do, He puts things on other families to do, but in each of us, if we are seeking to be obedient to Jesus, we can be used by God. Not just as individuals, but God has given us our families to impact the world for Him. This is a very unique conversation. I have actually been following the work of Jeremy Pryor for, I feel like a decade now. I was introduced to him by a friend, and one of the talks that I saw of his on YouTube really profoundly affected the way that I viewed my family, and I began to spread this message with people in our church. Jeremy is one of the founders of Family Teams. He's written the book Family Revision, and he has a passion for helping us see that the Western typical view of family and parenting as the springboard to launch individuals into culture to fly solo is not normal and not the best way, and especially not the only way. And so this is a longer conversation. This is one I just really encourage you to listen to with an open heart and an open mind. Maybe when you hear it today, the light bulb will come on, but you won't necessarily know exactly what to do next. So stick around towards the end of the podcast because I do ask Jeremy, what do I do if I'm convinced by what you've been talking about? So if you would like more information on Jeremy, on Family Teams, on their ministry, check out the show notes. And if you are too lazy to check out the show notes, or maybe you're in the middle of driving 80 miles an hour on the interstate, you're speeding, slow down. But I will just email them to you. How about that? If you get my Things for Thursday email, which you get by texting the word things to 66866, that's things to 66866, I send you a link to each podcast. Actually, I send you a link to like the last 4 or 5 podcasts so you can catch up. They have the show notes of anything that we've talked about, any resources mentioned, as well as other things to help your marriage, family, and discipleship. Guys, this is really one of those podcasts I encourage you listen all the way through. Listen with your spouse, because if you can get this is one that actually could change the dynamic of your generations, not just change what you're going to do this week, but change the dynamic of your generations. That's how important I think this conversation is. So enjoy this conversation with Jeremy. If you got questions, if you got feedback, I'd love to hear it because I know this is one I've really wrestled through and I needed a lot of work and help even to get my family to where we are today. But I think it's important, and I'm glad you're leaning into it, and I'm proud of you for doing it. So here's me and Jeremy. Jeremy, it's such a pleasure to meet you and have you on this podcast here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Hey, Jay. Yeah. Great to meet you. Excited to be here.
I became familiar with you from a talk that I found online. Man, this might have been 10 years ago or so. A friend put me on. And in that talk, you gave a background about how your worldview was changed on family. And so I'd love to just start there with your experience of how you came to define family in a different way than what we typically do in the Western sense.
Yeah. Well, a question that almost nobody asks is, what is a family? Like, if there's anything we all think we're experts at, it's like, we understand what a family is, right? I mean, we've all grown up in a family, we've been around families. And so this idea or this question was certainly the last thing on my mind growing up and, beginning my own family. But I grew up in the Seattle area, and in that area, it was really clear to me that something had gone terribly wrong with families. So many divorces, so much brokenness, so little hope there. And so it was almost like being in a post-family culture, so to speak. And so I just had very little interest. I was excited to get married, and kind of have that stuff, and maybe have a kid or two. But that was kind of the extent of my interest. And I was doing a semester abroad when I was 23 years old and single in Jerusalem. And I encountered a culture where there was almost an obsession that dads had with their children, dads in particular, which was very strange. And one day I watched a group of guys pushing, strollers with lots of kids in tow, a group of guys, which I'd never seen anything like that before. A group of guys. I've seen mommy brigades, certain places, but and I just started wondering, what's wrong with these guys? Like, don't they realize, like, there's nothing great about being a dad or like, I could tell there was something they believed I didn't believe. So I began to ask questions, and when as I asked and said, where does this value for fatherhood or for children or for family come from? The response I got was the Bible, and specifically the narratives in the Bible around Abraham. There's really an Abrahamic culture when it comes to family in the Middle East, and I was like, what is that? Because I had actually studied Abraham in seminary the year before intensively and never thought about his value of family as being something that could be applicable today. I just thought that as part of the primitive way that he lived. You hear him in various chapters crying out for descendants and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's, kind of the culture back then. People were obsessed with their children and multi-generational. But here I was in a modern Western culture where dads were doing the same thing and believing the same things. And so it just kind of got me thinking, like, as a Christian who believes the Bible, is there something here for us to learn from? And so that kind of started the journey for me of asking deep questions about what is the family? Is the way that we think about family in the West consistent with how the Bible describes family, and specifically how God designed family? And those are pretty dangerous questions to ask, as I discovered, because they can lead you down a really surprising rabbit hole. And that's kind of where I've been for a long time now.
It's really, you said you're from Seattle. I feel like I remember seeing a statistic that there are more dogs than children in Seattle, to
Yes,
where there's a lot of homes that are centered around their pet far more
that's
than
right.
they are even two generations, not even talking about a multi-generational family, but it's just
Yes,
people and their pets.
that's right. And as somebody growing up there, it made complete sense to me. I mean, if the goal of, because if you ask most young couples, why are you having children? They're going to give you a self-interested reason. Like they want experience, being a parent. And so if you could get that experience from a pet without ever having the incredibly enormous responsibility of raising children, then why wouldn't you take the easy route and experience that with a pet? And this is kind of, unfortunately, where this line of logic kind of goes. And I think it's going that way in many places. This is why we're seeing the fertility rates plummet all around the world as individualism and stability grow. People that don't feel like they need to have children stop having children, because the why behind why to build a family, why to have multiple children, is so weak. We don't realize how weak it is in our culture, but it's going to really define the future that our children are going to grow up in. And I think of it as almost like a post-family era, where people, they're just going to experiment with an endless number of, different kinds of relationships. Having fur babies instead of real babies, or is just one example.
You said post-family, and it immediately came to my mind with Sesame Street and how
Hmm.
on Sesame Street, which I don't have any reason to watch now that all of my kids are much further along than that. But I remember kind of on the tail end of the youngest kids, and their goal for promoting self-esteem and stuff like that. Um, the like, what is a family? And they would put out these different things of family. So sometimes a family is a mommy and a daddy and a kid. Sometimes a family is a mommy and no daddy and a kid. Sometimes a family is a mommy and a kid. Never do you have a mommy and a daddy and grandparents and cousins, and like it is a very um if you think for how people have lived through all of human history, and then the speed at which family has been redefined, it is a radical shift. I know, like, Western wise, we think if anything took 50 years, that's pretty slow, but for the course of human history, that's pretty radical, and especially the last 10 to 20 years, I think very
Yes.
radical. So I
Yes.
would ask you this: why have a family? If not for selfish reasons or for the experience of having kids, why do you see, as you begin to dive into this, what do you see are the real or the godly biblical reasons to have a family?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I think that what I like to do when I grapple with that question, why have a family, is if you were to ask Abraham that question, he would really be confused because he wouldn't see himself as making a decision to have a family. He would see himself, number one, immersed in an existing family, and he would see himself stewarding a family. So he would see himself as one of a whole family line, or launching, in his case, a giant family
Let me
line.
pause for just a second. That just makes me think of something. Even the terms we use, like if I get married with my wife, and then at
Right.
some point we're like, well, we're going to start a family now, as if a family doesn't exist, as if because we got married, we're disconnected from
That's right.
those before. So yeah, that strikes me that would be very strange to Abraham to have that question. And I don't know if you can remember your train of thought after that or not. So I'm sorry.
No, it's really interesting how everything has shifted, and it's really important to understand, like, why would that be so confusing to him, and how does he see things differently? And like I said, in the Middle East today, in Jewish cultures and many other cultures around the world, they have basically an Abrahamic way of thinking about family. So yeah, the way we think about family is, it is something that restarts with every generation. So and the reason for that is we primarily think about ourselves as individuals, and we don't think about ourselves primarily as a part of a tribe or continuum or this larger family line. And so that's why this would be such a weird question for Abraham, because everything he would be doing in his life, he would be seeing through the lens of his past, present, and future family. I am a father. I am a son. Everyone listening to this, every single person, whether you are single or married, whether you have kids or don't have kids, you are just as much a part of a family. You don't get to pick that. Nobody comes into this world without having that experience. Again, you might experience it very differently. If your parents abandon you as an orphan, you still have a mom and a dad. You still are a son or a daughter. These things pre-exist our individual decisions. Now, we don't like that in our culture. We live in a culture that absolutely worships the idea of uninhibited individuality. That is the highest goal and the highest idol in our whole culture. And so family is comes directly into conflict with that. And so in order to resolve that conflict, we've redefined family from the foundation up as a basically a group of individuals. So and you'll see this in so many movies, so many stories. It's fascinating how many movies, basically the theme is your family. Like, if you think about, like, the Little Mermaid or something, your family is this culture, this sort of giant thing that is inhibiting your individual expression. You just want to be free as an individual, and so you have to somehow escape from the constriction of this suffocating group, and get to that place of ultimate individual expression. And this is just a value collision, because we value the individual so much more highly than the family. All of those stories deeply resonate with us culturally, but the impact they've had on the family itself to say that the individual is always more important, that has redefined everything. I'll give you just one quick example. So we think about family, Western families, the definition that I think is maybe one way to describe it is a springboard for individual success. So to whatever degree this thing we call family is helping me as an individual become who I need to be as an individual, it's useful. To the degree that it causes me to sacrifice for it, it's not very valuable. And in fact, it could be toxic and something I need to get away from as fast as I can. So that's our definition of family. The way that Abraham would have saw family, one way of describing it is a multi-generational team on mission. So a team doesn't think about the challenges they face primarily from the perspective of the individual. They think about it as, we are facing this obstacle. We need to work together. We are stronger together. And so this is a team sport. And so, if you join a team, you're going to be constantly trained to not think of yourself as an individual. And it's not going to be a bad thing. Like, no one's going to say to somebody who's being an incredible team sport on the basketball court, like, dude, you just need to, you're being held back by, all this teamwork. What you really need to do is just grab that ball and forget about everybody else and just go and score. And that's the game. We all know that's not
that's
the
James
game.
Harden's
that
game,
doesn't work.
Just in case you're
yes, there are people. There are people that do that, and their reputations follow them. And I think that it's so we have. That's why I asked the question before we even can begin. What is the family? If the family is just a springboard for individual success, then great. We should use it and abuse it for our own individual ends, and that makes sense, right? And there are entities in which we do that. Sometimes you might join a club and you don't sacrifice for the club. You join as an individual to get something out of it, or a class or something. And if it's helping you as an individual, great. If it's not, then you leave. So if that's what the family is, then that's an appropriate way to think about it. But man, if the family is a team, then almost the opposite's true. And now all of a sudden you are wanting and needing to think about how do we work together? And so that's the radically different kind of way that you can view family. And for me, in my story, as somebody who 100% believed that the family was a collection of individuals, that it was a springboard for individual success, that the biggest question was, what am I getting out of this? What do I want? How many kids do I want? What kind of marriage do I want? Kind of how do I do this with the least amount of impingement on my personal individual desires? And then I had a very hard transition, just flipped from that idea to deciding to believe that the family is a team, that I am stewarding a multi-generational line, that as a father, I see all of life, my work life and my spiritual life, through the lens of my fatherhood. And I don't take that hat off. That identity doesn't come off of me because I'm in a different environment. When I made that transition, I realized I was coaching a team. Everything changed for me. Everything made sense about the family for me. So that's how different, though, these ideas really matter. And when this idea that the family is a group of individuals penetrated and then ultimately completely took over our idea of family in this culture, I think that's the direct route to the amount of fatherlessness we're seeing in our culture, the confusion that all of us have about family roles, the confusion we have about being parents and being sons and daughters of adult as we're going into adulthood, how to even relate to our parents as we age. All of these things, how to care for the elder. These are deeply confusing questions in a world in which family has been completely deconstructed into its sort of individual parts, and so that's kind of where we find ourselves, and that's a really challenging place
you
to
see
be.
how we got there, though. As technology increased and as productivity increased in industrial society, you no longer needed the generations to provide food or to provide shelter. I can go out on my own. At some point, my competency gets high enough to where on my own with a job, I can provide all of the finances that I need to pay for my lodging, to pay for my transportation, and to put food on the table. and actually have plenty left over for recreation in there. And so you could say, well, what more do I need from a family? If that's, if I've got food, shelter, clothing, and recreation taken care of, what more do I need? And so, yes, our society has become quite skilled at that. But then we see that there's this broader level of psychological need and especially spiritual need that those very things, like the ability to be so independent, might be great for where you want to live, might be great for the particular kind of food that you want to eat, but it's made emotional and spiritual dumpster fires across this nation.
Well, yeah, it has, and it's been absolutely devastating to the Christian mission. So, like, I know you guys are doing a series on mission, and it's awesome to live in a culture where we're not going to starve to death, or we're not afraid that there's going to be a tribe that's going to suddenly wipe out my family, or diseases that could kill us all. Even though that's been an issue lately. But it's great that we live in such stability. And what does a team do when it no longer needs its teamness for survival? And I say you funnel all of that energy into mission. And that's what's been really unfortunate about Christian families adopting this secular Western view of family. Because if you look at one of the things you can do is sort of study the number of families that have persisted thinking about themselves as multi-generational teams when they come into a very stable society are probably less than 1%. But man, they have a crazy impact on our culture. So Jewish families, for example, are one of the most resistant to the idea that they're no longer multi-generational. A lot of this has to do with some of the rhythms that are a part of just the faith of Judaism, like this Sabbath dinner and just how much they connect over generations. But they're less than 2% of the population of, for example, the United States. But they have over 40% of the financial resources. How did that happen? And it happened because if you stay together, if any family, if anybody listening to this right now decides that instead of hitting the reset button every generation, they're going to build up resources, faith resources, financial resources, all kinds of resources, and very skillfully pass those on to the next generation. In order to pass those on to the next generation, it won't be very long before you will be in the 1% of just about every category of influence, of finances. It's very easy given that much time. Somebody saving $50 a month can become very wealthy if they have 100 years. But we don't think in those kinds of timelines. And so the great business families, the great political families, and the great faith families that exist even in our culture virtually all think multi-generationally. What would happen if all Christians thought that way? What if happens if every single Christian family said, "Oh, God designed it family," just like He described it in Genesis 1, to be a multi-generational team? That's what He said over the first family when He said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it and rule." He wasn't speaking to a corporation or a nonprofit. He spoke to a family that He knew had to have generations in order to accomplish the mission He gave them. And so that's how God designed the first family. But if Christians thought this way, the amount of traction we would get, the amount of resources we would have, because we're working as a team and not just breaking up into individuals constantly, that we would have towards mission would be incredible. And so I just really grieve the decision, or whatever precipitated our decision to adopt this Western idea of family, what it's done to our ability to be effective in our mission and influential in our culture. We'll never see the true cost of this, but I think we can, really restore families back into the way God designed that. And again, for me, it's not so they can become wealthy or anything. It's really for the purpose of mission. We have a huge job God's given us, and we need the strongest team and the longest lasting team, the most skilled team we possibly can get to accomplish this mission. And the sort of foundation of that is this family team.
Jeremy, I wonder, this is a total theological can of worms. Obviously, there's a lot of the cultural influences that have made us not look as family on teams, especially multi-generational family as a team on mission. But I wonder how much, and I'm Baptist, grew up Baptist, still. I mean, I've always been in a Baptist church, whether I like hold to every single Baptist tenet close fisted, but the imminent return of Jesus, that's something that from the time I was old enough to hear the gospel, I grew up in churches that taught that, and I believe that. I believe in the imminent return of Jesus. But I think at least there's a level of that has maybe done a poor service to thinking about a lasting mission. Because if, like, I do believe that Jesus could come back at any time, and I think Jesus says in the gospel, we preach to all of the nations, and then the end will come. And we are literally within a few years of being able to reach every tribe, tongue, and nation with the gospel, unless it's already happened that we don't know about yet. So he could come at any time, but also he could have come at any time. Paul was waiting for the imminent return of Jesus. And so for 2,000 years, we've been waiting for it, and it is going to come like a thief in the night. But we have to figure out some way to live our life in such a way that if Jesus comes back now, he catches me all about his work and all about his kingdom. But if Jesus comes back in 2310, what have I done to set up my generations and my community and my world to thrive in the kingdom of God over that time? And I think that's like there has to be a way to do that, but most people don't even entertain that question of what to do. I don't know if that's one that you maybe have wrestled around with some and could have some insight on.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think our eschatology, or how the story kind of ends, or how the sort of new beginning happens, should influence the way we live. But I do think that there is a danger in extremely short-term thinking. And I think I would kind of break this up into a couple of different ways to think about it. One is that regardless of the amount of time we have left, that doesn't necessarily change the nature of what family is or how God designed it. And I think that you can see this in the New Testament. Like, one example that I don't think I've ever heard anybody preach on this, but it's such a super tactical, very concrete command in the New Testament. So Paul says in 1 Timothy 5 that if you have a widow in your family, then your first responsibility is to care for that widow. And I don't know if I've ever heard about that. Like, wait a minute, if Jesus is coming back and we've got a mission going on, like, why shouldn't we all just be running to the mission field? Like, what if you have a widow in your family? And all of a sudden Paul's like, well, of course, like we all know that your first responsibility is to take care. Like, we don't know that. Like, I didn't know that. I never thought that. So, I mean, Paul, these messages of Christ's imminent return were being given in a culture of potentially the strongest family culture in human history was in the first century. It's incredible. I go into detail on so they didn't have these. They weren't in a post-family culture. They were in a hyper-family culture, and so in that context, there really wasn't a huge challenge to their eschatology didn't all of a sudden rewire how they thought about what family was. But I agree with you that this can be something that we can almost, and I think that for the most part, it's actually more of a post hoc way of thinking about family. In other words, we already think about family because of other reasons: industrial revolution, hyper individualism, all the other things we've been talking about. This sort of assumption of stability. It's already totally redefined family. And now the question is, well, is that the way God designed it? And so one way to reason so we don't have to change how we think about family is to sort of, you might use the imminent return of Jesus as an excuse for not adopting or understanding the biblical family. And I've definitely seen that. I had those conversations with people who are literally like, okay, I do believe the Bible teaches this. That makes a lot of sense. But given the fact that I do believe Jesus is coming back in my lifetime, we're not going to be pursuing, this kind of vision for family. And part of my what I wonder, just like we were describing earlier about team versus whatever you believe about eschatology, if things get harder or change dramatically, you're going to need a team. Just like what happened with COVID, you all of a sudden saw people when things were getting disrupted and fall back and value their family, their home at a much higher level. It's like all of a sudden you had to ask, like, who do I live with, and who is my team through which I can actually be with in a time of crisis? And man, if there's anything about what appears the future is going to look like, if your eschatology is the return of Jesus, then it's going to be a time of crisis. So I think that we need to. So I think that it's important to sort of begin with the theological question: how did God design family? Are we veering away from that design? If we do, we're going to see the implications of that. Once we adopt the design that God has given us for family, He's the one who built it. He's the architect. Then I think it will have really important implications for how to handle whatever seasons we live in. And Peter, in his very last letter, where I really think Peter in Second Peter began to realize that Jesus was likely not going to come back in his lifetime, because that's when he began to say, guys, God is not slow in keeping His promises, as some understand slowness, but to the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. And I think his point in saying that was that it's really important. He saw like there could be a future of thousands of years, and that didn't necessarily change his this sort of sense in which, and this is a paradox that every Christian has to deal with in the way we plan our lives or our careers or our money in every area of life. The paradox or the tension that we have to balance between believing in the imminent return of Jesus and actually preparing for the 1,000 years or 2,000 years or however long we may be here. And I think that when it comes to family, there are really good ways to live into that tension, as it is with everything else, with work, with money, with relationships, to not treat these things cheaply because the imminent return is a potential. I think that this falls into that exactly the same category.
Let's Parent on Purpose has always been about equipping moms and dads to build thriving families centered around the hope of the gospel. If you regularly listen to this podcast, you're actually among a community of parents that spans 68 countries, including many in the 1040 window, where there are few churches and limited access to the gospel. As the amount of content I produce over the years grows, so do the cost of maintaining, storing, and producing all of the different details that help make this show helpful. If God has put you in a place where you might be able to help a little bit and support this work, would you please consider going to letsparentonpurpose.com/support and either giving a one-time gift or becoming a regular supporter through Patreon? If you're not in a good place to support the show, that's fine. I pray you continue listening, growing, and sharing it with others. That's it. No hard push. Just a simple request that if you're able to and would like to, help share the load of the show at www.letsparentonpurpose.com/support. Okay, Jeremy, so you've convinced me. The Western way of looking at family is trash. I agree with that. I've got kids from 9 to almost 19, and I want a multi-generational family that looks at themselves as a team. Where do we start?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. I would say the number one thing that if you want to create a multi-generational family, you have to get really good at a weekly family meal that's designed multi-generationally. So we all know what it's like in Thanksgiving or Christmas to come together with your larger extended family, or come back to mom and dad's house, or go visit the grandparents, or have your kids come home. Your kids are adults. And we get to practice that once or twice a year in this kind of Western culture, the way a lot of our families are designed. And going back to sort of where I learned a lot of this living in Israel, it was so shocking to me the way that adult children, we'd go on the bus just before Shabbat, and everyone was rushing off to mom and dad's house, no matter, whatever age they were, unless they were the ones hosting. And man, you build a different kind of family when you get together 52 times a year for a family meal than you do 2 or 3 times a year for a family meal. And so what I want to do is, and we did this when my kids were really little, we began to craft a meal, and our heart was, let's craft a weekly meal that is so fun, so compelling, so relationally deep with our kids, and that integrates our faith into that meal, that our kids couldn't imagine not coming to that every week if they lived, in the area, or they, when they start having their kids, they couldn't imagine either coming to ours or reproducing that in their home. If you do that, you will not be able to stop a multi-generational family from emerging. That kind of investment of spending, 3 hours a week And I'm not talking about the kind of weekday family meal where you quickly catch up as you run off to the next thing, which are great and important. But I'm really talking about a sort of a sacred time where you say, like, on Friday night or Saturday night, or you can grab a weeknight, but make sure that you really protect that as a place where, a son is a son, a daughter is a daughter, a father is a father, a mother is a mother. We've learned a ton from Jewish culture and Judaism about how to design a meal in which the family
Hmm.
roles are all celebrated. For example, in a typical Jewish household during a Shabbat dinner, the father will recite Psalm 31 over his wife. The mother will put her hands on her daughters and bless them. May the Lord make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Things like that. This is so rich, and it communicates that motherliness, that fatherliness. Everyone at a Shabbat table is a son or a daughter, a father or a mother. And I don't think that you need to do it as a Sabbath or a Shabbat dinner. You can, but I think that what's critical is that you craft a table time, a family meal in which those kinds of roles are respected and experienced. They're respected not for the sake of holding on to some kind of abstract ideal. It's you want to be immersed in the familyness of the family. There's not a lot of that going on. And so if you have, so in our family meal, whoever the oldest father or mother, patriarch, matriarch of the family line, there's specific, things they do. And I just wrote those out on cards, ways that they bless our kids, or, we ask them questions. We want to honor them and have them have that experience. So that's really my favorite place to start. There's a lot you can build on that. There's a lot of team and mission that can then flow out, but you want to start with identity. And so how do you craft identity? We talked a lot about that in the church or as a culture, but we talk about it in a way too abstract way. Identity is formed through rhythmic practices. So you have to develop a practice in which these identities are experienced and honored. And so if you craft a really amazing weekly family meal in which those things are happening, and and I encourage people to, a lot of times the next question people have is, well, I don't want to invite my parents to that. They're we're estranged, or they're kind of toxic, or then go downstream. That's where we started. I didn't feel comfortable inviting my parents to our first family meal, not because of them, but because of me. I was like very intimidated to lead my parents or my wife's parents. And so I just had to practice as a dad for a number of years, just having a meaningful family meal with me and our kids. Me and my wife, April, we had to figure out like how to live into that. But after a number of years of doing that, we started inviting, grandparents over once a month and then giving them kind of places of honor. And then once we kind of figured that out, it started happening every other week. Then eventually got so life giving that we began to experience it every week. But if my parents weren't excited about it, or that wouldn't make sense, I would just encourage families that you may be the first generation to begin to restore this kind of a family. And so what you do with you and your wife or your husband and your children is really, you can start this at any point.
Did it feel really awkward with you guys when you first started?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I was a youth pastor as well. Like I was very comfortable. Put me in a church building, in front of 100 kids, and I was fine. But put me in a dining room with my wife and kids, and I felt really awkward talking about spiritual things, because we have a culture in the current church, a very church centered culture where that our spiritual rhythms all happen outside the home. And so when you begin to bring any spiritual rhythms in the home, there's always going to be a season of uncomfortability. And so you have to, what I think about is just take the hit for the
Hmm.
future generations. Like, I don't want my kids to feel like it's weird to pray as a family, or read the Bible as a family, or talk about spiritual things, or say blessings over each other. I'm going to feel weird because I didn't grow up doing that. And, this just doesn't feel like the environment for that. But over several months or years, it became more and more comfortable for me, and for my kids. It's like it's very, very normal. They're natives to a culture where spiritual rhythms are in the home, and so you can give that amazing gift to your kids if you choose to take the hit in your generation.
So, as the Pryor family views themselves as a multi generational team on mission, how would you define the mission of the Pryor family?
Yeah, so we are constantly asking the Lord for different assignments and kind of bringing those into the way we think about our mission. So one of our assignments that we believe we have is to restore this biblical idea of family. So that's definitely something that we've all taken on board. Another assignment, that we have been working at as a family is how to create a disciple making outpost in our city. So we feel very connected to our city of Cincinnati. And so I've got adult kids, my daughter Kelsey's 21 and my son Jackson's, 20. We've got 5 kids, so all the way down to 12 years old. And so we live a rhythm of disciple making. So we have lots of different rhythms where we invite, not yet believers and believers into various things we do on a weekly or monthly basis. And so we as a team are constantly hosting things and doing various things together to try to extend the kingdom through our household and through our life together as a family. My parents also live with us, and they're very involved in those actions and in those different rhythms. And we started those things one rhythm at a time. So I'd say like our sort of specific, the way we function as a family is as a disciple making outpost. But then I think we also have in our mission the some sort of more broad things for the larger church that we feel like assignments that we can participate in helping, and this is one of those things.
This is also helpful, and sometimes it's helpful to hear how one family does it so that you can try to imagine yourself, even if it's going to be different, to take it from theory just to how a single family does it. But part of what you do is coaching of fathers and of families for how they can individually do this. I would love for you to share a little bit about your family teams ministry, and if somebody's intrigued by this conversation, how they might take the next step to get connected to you.
Well, yeah. So thanks for that. And anybody who decides, okay, I really do believe that family is a multi-generational team on mission, one of the things that's going to happen to you is you're going to open up your toolbox, and almost all the tools that we give families are for, the springboard for individual success. And so what we do at family teams is we try to give lots of tools to families that are beginning to think this way. So we have a course on there called the 7-Day Family, which describes how to craft one of these family meals I described, but also kind of walks through a paradigm of how to design a weekly rhythm that is all team based, and it can enfold all the different parts of the family into that weekly rhythm so you can be on mission and balance all of the different demands of family life in such a way that it could be really fruitful. We also have like lots of events we do. We do at least once a year, we have a big conference where we walk people through this paradigm and give the first 3 tools, team timetable for how to begin to craft a multi-generational family team. And so we'll probably be doing one in the Texas kind of probably area somewhere in the fall. Because of COVID, we're still trying to kind of planning that one out. We got lots of podcasts, the Family Teams podcast, the 5-Minute Fatherhood podcast, where we talk about very particular ways of approaching life in this culture as a family team. And so, yeah, those are some of our main different things. But yeah, go to familyteams.com and just click. There's a button called Start Here, and it will walk you through a lot of the different tools that we've been working on, and we're constantly developing new tools. We also have a book that I've written called Family Revision. So if you just want to really be immersed in this conversation around the theology of family, I really wrote that for people that wanted to, get into all those passages in the Bible. Did the New Testament alter in any way the kind of Hebrew scriptures idea of family? Are they different? Or do they complement each other? Are they the same? And so I walk through all the theology in that book, as well as I have 7 different kind of major tools that we've been working on as a family team. Everything from finances as a family team and how that works with us, in different rhythms. So those are some of the things that we've got going over at familyteams.com.
Great. And we'll put all of those in the show notes to this episode here. We'll put the links in case you're driving or jogging and can't quite get to it right now. But Jeremy, this is such an intriguing conversation, and something that I'll just tell those who are listening, just because you hear this one time doesn't mean it's going to click right away. I think the concept clicks really quickly. Like, I think that we're all wanting more from our family, and I know just even I have a daughter getting married this summer, like not wanting it to end, that, okay, we've raised her and now she's married and now she's, off solo in the world. And we have, absolutely no desire for that, but how to build this in such a way that it lasts longer. I want my kids to not just know who their grandparents were, but, know their great grandparents and know their grandparents. And, so this is really helpful. It takes a while to get there. I think I would say, because the other thing is we've been swimming in a particular kind of water our entire lives. And so I thank you for this conversation. And I really do hope those who are listening will explore more and just appreciate you and your heart and what God has put on you guys. Is there a particular way we can pray for you as we close out?
Man, well, we're just continuing to ask the Lord to give us, wisdom to figure out, like what you just said is my biggest constant question. And that is the Romans 12. How do we not be conformed, but be transformed in this area? It's been, really hard to figure that out. And I know for each family listening to this, like we're in a similar situation like you guys are, where our kids are getting older and, everything from dating to, to marriage, to integrating, in-laws, to like all those challenges are very, very real. And doing those as a family team in a culture that doesn't think about family as a team it's not easy to figure out. And so God's really blessed us in so many ways with just everyone being very excited about figuring it out. But I think we need wisdom as we try to restore something, that seems to have been lost. So I would just continue to ask for prayer for us and those all the families that are trying to make this transition. It's not easy.
Yeah, let's pray for that right now. Father, I thank you so much for this conversation, and it stirs my heart, and I want more for my family. I thank you for my family, and I want my family to be a team that's on mission for the sake of Jesus. Lord, I pray for Jeremy and the work that they're doing, God, the new questions that they're having to figure out. I just think that as parents, we're never experts because we're always in a brand new spot. We've never been quite here before. And so we're always trying to figure out how to take what we know, how to take what we've experienced, how do we take the things of the Lord and then apply them to this brand new situation in our life. And I pray that you would help them to be a faithful, effective witness in Cincinnati. Lord, I pray that you would bless his children as they are in these phases of life where as much as mom and dad want to be a team, they've got to make their own decisions on that. And I know that can be a scary thing as a parent. So we just pray and trust that your Holy Spirit would do that work in our kids. We can't make our kids do anything, and that is really at any age. We can't make their hearts do anything. And so I pray that instead of trying to force that, we would lead ourselves well, that we would trust you, and pray that you would do that good thing in their lives. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Jeremy, thank you.
So good. Thank you so much for that.
Friend, if you're still listening all the way to the credits, then I hope that means that this was a particular blessing to you to hear this podcast. If so, I want to encourage you to share it with somebody else that you think might be helped by it. You're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find out more information about show notes, about past issues, all kinds of things to help your family. And I do want to say that Let's Parent on Purpose is a user-supported podcast. And if you would like to be a part of that, you can go to letsparentonpurpose.com, learn how to be a supporter through Patreon or through a one-time gift. Thank you so much for listening. Again, share this with somebody that you know needs to hear it. Remember that parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. And we'll talk to you soon.